I have spent the last 13 years avoiding Tekken. I've watched it a lot, I've been adjacent to the scene, I've even loaded up training mode once or twice, but I've never played it. The reason has always been simple, I just don't play 3D fighting games. I've poured so many hours into traditional 2D fighters, and that third dimension just looked entirely alien to me. I felt as if none of my skills would be transferable, and I wasn't ready to suffer the ego death required to learn something completely outside of my comfort zone. But I did, and I have not been so thoroughly consumed by a game in years. I love it, and I want to talk about why I think you might too. Before we dive in, let me caveat everything I'm about to say with this. I am not educated enough to make this video. I fully appreciate that. There are people decades deep into this franchise who have a complete understanding of everything it represents. I'm not that guy. All I am is someone who's really into competitive fighting games, that gets very excited when something pulls me out of my rusted, old, cynical shell. View this video as more of a reaction to Tekken rather than a review of any kind, because as I said, I'm not qualified to do that. However, if I can infect a couple of people with that same excitement I have, at least I might find some new comrades in the lower ranks. This video is for the 2D heads who have been scared off the game. I can't make you like the aesthetics, characters or soundtrack, that's your call, but I might be able to show you some of the top level ideas present here and convince you why they're worth your time. The other thing I must mention is there are lots of critiques of Tekken floating around online. There are some which are visibly valid to anyone who plays fighters, such as the netcode and the frame drops, but these require no real explanation from me. We can all appreciate that those are bad things without a breakdown. However, there are supposed issues like DLC character balance, which I don't really have any kind of grasp of. I don't know how much truth there is in this discourse, I'm not going to pretend I do. I'll leave the complaining about Tekken to the Tekken players, they've earned it. Without further ado, let's get into it. If I had to summarise this game in one word, I'd probably go with dense. There's lots of reasons for this, but from the outside, there's one that stands above the rest. We've all done the same thing when you look at Tekken. You see the number of characters, you see the move list, you Alt F4 and load up Street Fighter. I've done this myself. The sheer magnitude of the game is intimidating when you look at it in abstract, and when you're foreign to 3D games, that is all you can do. It's an unfortunate identity to the game and one that has been somewhat exaggerated or at least discussed reductively by non-Tekken players. That being said, this density is why I have fallen in love with Tekken, but it's not just found in the strings, the combos and the characters. There is so much to this game. Walls, throws, ground breaks, ducking highs, getting off the ground, low parries, dear god so many things to learn, and no matter how much time you put in, there is always something else to work on. Let's address this complexity because if we're being honest, it's the most common reason people won't touch this game. In Tekken, there is an impossible amount to optimize. Not impossible if you want to compete at a decent level, but if you truly want to master every situation, you could spend forever doing it. There are so many variables just from stages, characters and positioning alone that trying to be perfect is so difficult. That might seem pretty daunting, and it is, but there are a couple of factors at play here which do numb that feeling. For one, the Tekken franchise respects your time. It's a legacy game, and although it shifts between titles to varying degrees, there are lots of knowledge checks and information which is going to be relevant in 10 years. There will be launch punishable moves that you can find today that when you hit 40 will still be launch punishable. It's an investment, and Namco understands that. Another way in which this game's dedication to legacy benefits the series is you don't have a divided scene. Tekken 3 players are playing Tekken 7, Tekken 5 players are playing Tekken 7, Tekken 6 players are playing Tekken 7, and honestly that's a great thing. There is an understood difficulty to a lot of franchises like Guilty Gear and Street Fighter, where with each iteration they drastically changed the games on a fundamental level. As a consequence, the player base is completely split. You can find people playing Third Strike, Street Fighter 4, Alpha 2, basically any previous version of Street Fighter, and a lot of those players don't like Street Fighter 5. Not because it's bad, but because it's not what they want from the franchise. Of course, there is some preference in the versions of Tekken, but the reality is the divide is comparatively non-existent, making the game just this giant katamari of a community where with each new release typically they just gain players and have very little drop off. This is all to say that if you load up the game now and enjoy yourself, you're probably going to continue to do so through multiple iterations. You're not wasting your time. However, the big reason Tekken's density isn't an issue is that you don't have to learn everything at once. In fact, you should consciously avoid doing so. A huge problem a lot of players have in a lot of games is the fact they expect to load it up, turn on training mode for an afternoon, and have all of their foundational knowledge established. This simply never works, and especially in Tekken. You can't brute force the learning process, you simply have to play and be actually aware. Block something you haven't seen before, try punishing. Try ducking next time. Maybe try and sidestep. You have to engage with it as a learning process and not just a platform to stomp people. When people talk about Tekken, what comes up is how difficult the game is. But difficulty is relative to who you're fighting. During my first couple months of playing, I put zero effort into learning how to get up off the ground. I just held back. Why? Because no one was punishing me for it. Sure, as I progressed up the ranks I had to learn it, but that was in response to my opponents, not in response to it just being in the game. It's essentially progressive overload. This game has one of the biggest player bases of any traditional fighting game. You will literally always have someone to fight on your level, so it's very reasonable to slowly learn. You won't get thrown in the deep end with people who have 10 years experience under their belt. They'll be like you, learning, or mashing, but it's still useful fighting them if you engage correctly. So what does this density add to the game? Well, a hot topic in fighting game discourse is player expression, and while I personally believe that player expression can be born from both freedom or limitations and anything in between, I have to admit I am completely enamored by one of the core conceits in Tekken. You can excel as an individual through any type of gameplay due to how limitless the levels achievable are, and this is directly because of how fleshed out each aspect is. Mechanical or mental, if there is something in fighting games that you adore, you will be able to spend countless hours in this title trying to perfect it, and actually be rewarded for your efforts. If you love execution, Tekken has that. If you love mind games, Tekken has that. If you love knowledge checks, Tekken has that. It has it all. Every aspect of fighters is present here. It has competitive value and it has depth. Let's delve a little deeper into this idea because you could probably make this case for the majority of fighters and be correct. I believe, however, it is far more evident in Tekken. Knowledge is important here. You can define yourself as a player at all levels by being knowledgeable, not just defensively but offensively too. Maybe you get a weird hit on a back-turned opponent that's kind of at a sidewall, you could optimize that. Maybe you could optimize it versus a specific character too. You certainly don't have to, but you could. Situational awareness is a key feature of all fighting games, no doubt about that. However, the difference here is the sheer number of variables. Strings put opponents in different states and can reveal different punishes. Combos at angles on stages with complex geometry can provide that extra tap of damage to win you around. If you put the time in, you will always have something to add to the notepad. It can be a lab monster's dream. When you're fresh to the game, you'll look at strings with questions like, is that a low? Can I duck that? And it will all feel like an arbitrary knowledge check. However, as time goes on, you begin to realise that being aware of everything at once is a huge ask. Sure, you can know a move list of 50 strings, but are you ready for them? Conditioning and safe play can leave you open to all manner of risky moves, and you have to sift through your brain to find the right answer. The density of the move list actually gives bad attacks a chance to shine, because sometimes the best move isn't the right one. Very streamlined games simply cannot have this to the same degree. If you have one slow startup gimmick move, it's obviously going to be far easier to act accordingly against than 20. This awareness and knowledge is an avenue in which someone can excel in, but not everyone does, and that's what's important. Games with an impossible skill ceiling make it so even at the top level, people aren't perfect. If everyone passes every knowledge check, hits all the hardest combos, and knows all the situations, players will start to blend together. This depth is a means for you to define yourself. Like I've mentioned, this expression and depth isn't just limited to knowledge, it's mechanical as well. Their execution is as difficult as you make it in this game. Combos are the most obvious way in which this is true. Most top players have two types of combos: tournament combos and optimal combos. Although it's not true with every character, for the most part people will sacrifice damage or positioning for the sake of making a combo as consistent as possible in a high stress environment. However, some will put themselves to the test and throw everything on the line for those extra hits, and when they do, it's magical. That once again probably sounds intimidating, but it's simply part of this recurring theme in Tekken of slow, gradual progress. If you go in with the idea that you're going to land the hardest combo in every situation, you will fail and you will be frustrated. However, once you become more comfortable with your character and the timing on their moves, maybe that's an avenue you want to explore as part of your journey. Execution is a big part of defense too. Playing a Mishima and being able to do perfect electric wing godfists is no easy feat, but it can skew block punishes massively by giving you extra damage. Being able to make something deemed as inconsistent a reliable tool is possible if you're willing to put the hours in, and not every modern fighter offers you that opportunity. Even movement can be as technical and as quick as you want. Korean backdashing, wave dashing, sidestep blocking, all of these things have a sliding scale of mechanical demand to them, which you can master, but you don't have to. At the start I would simply do a backdash cancel to get myself out of trouble. Then as time went on, I started adding to that, but only when it began to feel like an intuitive thing. What I love here is the balance of mechanical skills and knowledge. Sure, you can be an execution god, but without knowing how to put that to use, it's virtually useless. You'll find yourself in the lower ranks with legions of Kazuya players hitting punishes I could never dream of, but unable to apply their skills without proper matchup knowledge and mind games. Mind games of which there are a lot. Tekken is a very back and forth game. Taking turns is fast paced and frequent. Being able to condition your opponent with safe, compact play and cashing it in with risky, educated launchers so quickly within a round feels amazing. The amount of data you can collect from a simple jab followed by a backdash by itself is an endless rabbit hole that you can climb down, all because of this game's endless variables. The point is, these are all means for one to excel, and at the top level there are people that aren't amazing at every aspect. Some players have comparatively bad execution, bad sidestepping, sometimes even bad throw breaks. Perfection is unobtainable and Tekken doesn't demand it from you, it just wants you to try. How does this affect you as an average player though? Well, it can hugely impact the lived experience we have all got from the process of improvement, plateaus. It's par for the course in fighting games, but you will eventually hit a point where you feel like you're entirely unable to improve. There are abstracts to fighters such as mind games, which take countless matches to become more consistent at, which can really suck the fun out of the game because you simply have to just slam your head enough times at the wall until you go through. Certainly there are ways to help speed this up, but it's still an arduous process. However, because there is always something specific and quantifiable to improve at within Tekken, from the mechanical to the mental at all levels of play, it is a far less frustrating experience when you're grinding to find those abstracted qualities that make a top player. Complexity is scary, and people don't like to begin a journey when they feel like it has no end. The thing is though, when you embrace that long road and you're prepared for it, it's so joyous because you will have defined yourself as a player. There is not one path you have to walk to improve. Your self-expression and your interests will be rewarded, and we will all be able to see it within your play, which honestly in a modern era isn't that common. I view Tekken like a traditional hobby. Are you going to the gym for the first time and throwing around 4 plates like it's nothing? No. Are you picking up a guitar and immediately banging out some bolt thrower? No. These goals are absolutely something you can have, but if you can't learn to love the path to them, you'll bounce off and ultimately miss out on one of fighting game's most wonderful titles.